what happens when a man trusted to heal turns out to be the architect of a criminal empire hiding in plain sight. The question cracked through Seattle like a shockwave on the morning federal agents smashed open the quiet facade of a respected hospital director's home. At 5:14 a.m. in the cold gray light of North Seattle, a two-story suburban house, perfect lawn family photographs, medical diplomas became the center of one of the most disturbing federal raids in recent memory. Neighbors watched in disbelief. How could a man celebrated for saving lives be accused of helping destroy them? The operation began with precision. A federal battering ram shattered the front entrance while FBI, ICE, and supporting tactical teams flowed through the residence in tight formation. The rooms felt eerily ordinary until agents descended into a narrow basement corridor where the image of a trusted physician collapsed in an instant. Bags of heroin, weapons, ammunition crates marked with cartel identifiers, and then the revelation that stunned even veteran agents: a fully equipped clandestine surgical suite glowing under sterile lights. Stainless steel tables, medical instruments arranged with clinical perfection, a room designed not for healing but for processing victims and maintaining the cartel's supply chain with medical level efficiency. As investigators swept deeper, the scale of the operation unraveled. 50 pounds of heroin were recovered inside the home, along with a weapons cache that included short-barreled rifles and modified handguns, tools of intimidation and enforcement. But the drugs found on site were only a fraction of the story. Federal forensic teams quickly uncovered encrypted drives, offshore banking trails, and coded medical files that suggested the doctor's home was merely the operational tip of a vast and deeply embedded network. The shock inside federal command posts grew as analysts pieced together the details. This was not a corrupt employee acting alone. It was a figure who had blended medical authority with cartel strategy to create a pipeline few criminals could ever access. Emerging evidence aligned with patterns highlighted in recent reporting from major international outlets on transnational criminal infiltration into Western healthcare systems revealed that medical institutions remain prime targets for traffickers seeking legitimacy and mobility. Cartels have increasingly exploited medical procurement loops, donation programs, and inter-hospital partnerships to mask illicit supply chains. Against that backdrop, the Seattle case was not just an anomaly, it was a dangerous proof of concept. The geopolitical implications were serious. With Donald Trump back in the White House in 2025 and public pressure rising for stronger domestic security, the administration viewed the raid as both a victory and a warning. If a cartel could infiltrate a respected hospital director's office in a major American city, what did that say about national resilience? And how far had this network reached beyond Seattle? The human impact was immediate. For Seattle residents, especially older Americans who had grown up trusting doctors, city officials, and community institutions, the betrayal felt personal. People wondered how many red flags had been ignored, how many lives had been endangered, and how deeply a cartel could root itself into a city known more for innovation than organized crime. And as dawn rose over North Seattle, the question lingered not just for the city, but for the entire country. If a danger like this can grow undetected in the institutions meant to protect Americans, what other hidden threats remain unseen, waiting to surface? What does it mean when a doctor, someone sworn to save lives, secretly builds the financial architecture of a criminal empire? Hours after the pre-dawn raid shattered the illusion surrounding Dr. Lawrence Whitlock, investigators began dissecting the digital and financial skeleton of his operation. What they uncovered was not a momentary lapse or a recent deviation. It was a decade-long transformation in which a respected Seattle hospital director evolved into one of the most valuable assets a transnational cartel could ever acquire. The revelations unfolded under fluorescent lights inside an FBI evidence room, where rows of encrypted phones, hard drives, donation records, and patient files formed a mosaic of corruption. The initial shock came from a financial trail that stretched far beyond Seattle. Federal accountants identified 23 shell corporations registered across Nevada, Belize, and Panama companies with no employees, no contracts, and no verifiable operations. Yet millions of dollars flowed through them under the guise of medical grants and procurement fees. A strategy increasingly mirrored in recent international cases reported by investigative outlets monitoring cartel financing structures. Within hours, analysts traced the funds back to intermediaries in Mexico and Venezuela pathways consistent with Latin American cartel laundering patterns reported by global financial watchdogs. Whitlock's unique position gave him access to specialized medical supply chains, charitable programs, and international donor networks vulnerabilities that Reuters and DW have warned about in recent coverage on cartel infiltration into Western institutions. Using those vulnerabilities, he cultivated a carefully tiered system, legitimate hospital partnerships on the surface, mass trafficking routes beneath. The deeper agents dug, the more disturbing the picture became. Encrypted emails revealed communications with cartel liaisons using clinical language as code. Move the patients tonight. Border team ready. These messages were not medical directives. They were logistical orders connected to human trafficking victims. In a folder labeled Logistics Agents, found schedules for 9 kidnapped individuals complete with falsified medical assessments and projected use value. Nearby, a detailed shipment ledger mapped a route for 1 ton of heroin and 1.5 tons of meth and fentanyl moving through Washington's ferry system before sunrise. This was no isolated criminal act, it was infrastructure. Strategically, the case illustrated a phenomenon security analysts across Europe and the US have warned about: criminal organizations blending into legitimate sectors to shield their operations from scrutiny. Whitlock was not smuggling drugs from back alleys. He was embedding cartel activity inside medical administration donation pipelines and municipal partnerships. And because he presented the polished exterior of a civic-minded physician oversight system, simply trusted him. That trust became the raw material of the cartel's expansion. The political dimension soon followed. Under President Donald Trump's renewed emphasis on restoring internal security in 2025, federal agencies viewed the Whitlock case as a potential national weak point. If the medical system, one of the most regulated in the US, could be breached this deeply, what about other sectors, energy, shipping, public health? The administration was already dealing with rising concerns about fentanyl trafficking waves, and this case provided a chilling illustration of how such networks maintain resilience. Human impact amplified the outrage. For Seattle residents, the emotional toll was profound. Whitlock had delivered keynote speeches, handed out scholarships, and appeared in local news praising community health initiatives. Older residents who remembered Seattle's more tightly knit civic culture felt blindsided. If a man with a white coat, a flawless resume, and decades of public trust could betray his city so thoroughly, who else might be hiding behind institutional authority? In living rooms across the city, people began asking the same question law enforcement had been forced to confront: if a respected medical leader was secretly a pillar of a cartel network, how many more trusted figures across America could be quietly enabling similar shadows? And beneath that question came another, more unsettling, more urgent in a country struggling to balance openness with security. How do Americans protect themselves from the threats that grow not outside their institutions, but inside them? What happens when a criminal pipeline hidden for years suddenly becomes a ticking clock measured in minutes, not months? By 3:40 a.m., only hours after agents raided Dr. Whitlock's home, the investigation had shifted from uncovering corruption to preventing an immediate catastrophe. Intelligence confirmed that 9 kidnapped victims were being held inside a cartel-run warehouse near the Everett waterfront. At the same time, a massive narcotics convoy carrying 1 ton of heroin and 1.5 tons of meth and fentanyl was preparing to move before sunrise. The quiet analytical work of federal investigators transformed instantly into a high-stakes rescue mission. Inside the Joint Operations Center north of Seattle, screens glowed with heat signatures, warehouse schematics, traffic patterns, and encrypted message reconstructions. Analysts compared the developing situation to patterns identified in recent reporting from BBC and The Guardian on cartel tactics, heavily fortified sites, multi-tiered lookout positions, and rapid response escape vehicles designed to scatter and overwhelm law enforcement. What stood out in Seattle was the brazenness. A warehouse near a major port within reach of residential neighborhoods operating in plain view of one of America's fastest growing metropolitan regions. Commanders concluded that delay was no longer an option. Under President Donald Trump's 2025 security posture, placing heavier emphasis on rapid interdiction and protection of U.S. borders and communities, federal leadership classified the operation as high-risk hostage rescue, triggering a multi-agency mobilization rarely seen on American soil. FBI hostage rescue team, DEA fast units, ICE Homeland Security investigations, and tactical medics formed a single strike element. The mission brief was short, sharp, and urgent: neutralize the armed cartel cell, prevent the narcotics export, and extract the 9 victims alive. As teams rolled toward Everett in unmarked SUVs, tension climbed. Drone recon from the harbor area revealed rooftop silhouettes, spotters with rifles mirroring the tactics used by major criminal networks highlighted in international defense analyses. The cartel wasn't just guarding its product, it was preparing for a fight. The Everett waterfront, normally quiet at night, with only the low hum of cargo machinery, had transformed into a battlefield waiting to ignite. The strategic implications ran deeper than a single raid. Analysts inside Washington and at national security desks across the country understood the weight of what was unfolding. A successful extraction would demonstrate federal capability and restore public confidence after the shock of discovering a cartel apparatus inside a Seattle hospital. But failure, loss of life, escape of traffickers, or the release of a 2.5-ton narcotics shipment would ripple not only through the Pacific Northwest, but also through global perceptions of U.S. internal stability. Cartels, foreign intelligence services, and transnational criminal groups watch such moments, carefully gauging the strength and resolve of American institutions. As the convoy approached Everett, agents saw the first sign of imminent danger, faint light reflections off rifle scopes positioned along a warehouse roofline. No cartel prepares lookouts like that, unless they expect conflict, yet they still didn't realize the full weight of the United States government was closing in. Inside the lead vehicle, silence settled over the team, no speeches, only the metallic click of weapons checks. Every agent understood the stakes. They were minutes from a fortified compound. Inside were terrified hostages, whose lives depended on speed and precision. Outside stood armed traffickers ready to kill to protect their product. And hanging above it all was the broader question gripping Seattle, Washington state, and increasingly the entire country. If a cartel could entrench itself this deeply, how far had America's internal vulnerabilities already been stretched? As the tactical element tightened its final approach and the Everett waterfront came into full view, one thought cut through the tension across all command channels. If the U.S. could not stop this convoy before sunrise, what message would that send to every criminal network watching America's resolve? What does a battlefield look like when it erupts not in a foreign war zone, but on American soil, inside a quiet industrial port city still half asleep before dawn? The moment federal teams breached the Everett warehouse, the answer came in a flash of steel fire and echoes that shook the harbor. The assault began with a DEA breaching charge that tore open the eastern wall, splitting metal like paper and lighting the night in a burst of white sparks. Seconds later, the warehouse exploded into a torrent of gunfire. Inside, agents faced a labyrinth engineered for ambush. Forklifts overturned to form barricades. Chemical drums stacked into makeshift bunkers. Catwalks overhead lined with shooters. The scene reflected the same urban warfare tactics described in recent European and US security analyses covering cartel expansions, tight spaces, layered defenses, and rapid-fire mobility designed to disorient attackers. For federal agents, the challenge was immediate overpower a fortified enclave while protecting 9 terrified hostages hidden somewhere inside. Rifle fire erupted from firing ports carved into the walls. HRT operators dove behind concrete pillars as bullets tore through crates. Smoke and dust swirled in the air, turning visibility into a moving fog. On an upper catwalk, a cartel gunman raised a scoped rifle, only to drop moments later as an FBI sniper fired cleanly through a shattered skylight. That shot shifted momentum. Tactical teams surged forward, shields up, advancing through the warehouse's maze-like interior. Then the battle constricted into brutal close quarters. 2 gunmen burst from behind a stack of pallets, charging HRT agents in a desperate push. Muzzle flashes exploded inches from ballistic helmets. A flashbang detonated under a conveyor belt, shaking rafters and drowning the room in white-hot light. As the crack faded, agents fought through the disorientation. They knew every second increased the danger for the hostages. Outside, the most volatile threat broke loose. 3 cartel trucks roared to life and barreled toward the perimeter engine, screaming. One truck slammed into a chain-link gate, sending sparks into the night air. A DEA armored vehicle intercepted, swerving hard, cutting off the escape route. Agents fired into the tires, forcing the truck sideways until it crashed into a cargo container powerful enough to rattle the entire row. Overhead, a helicopter spotlight snapped on, turning the port into a stage of fleeing silhouettes and abandoned rifles. The expanding light revealed the raw outline of a criminal organization collapsing under federal pressure, its careful planning undone in minutes. Back inside, ICE agents intercepted traffickers attempting to force the hostages toward a refrigerated truck. When a gunman opened a rapid burst, a K-9 team launched forward, knocking him down before he could reload. Tactical medics rushed in behind them, cutting restraints, checking pulses, pulling victims away from the combat zone. Finally, a signal echoed through comms container located. It was the steel unit referenced in Whitlock's encrypted messages, its lock industrial grade reinforced. Bolt cutter snapped. The door clanged open. 9 hostages, shaking, bound, cold, exhausted, stared back into the beam of tactical flashlights. They were alive! That single moment shifted the entire trajectory of the operation. Despite the explosions, the close quarters fighting, the attempted escape, and the tactical risks layered into every corner of the warehouse, the United States had prevented a mass trafficking event and intercepted a narcotics shipment powerful enough to destabilize communities across multiple states. Strategically, the operation signaled more than a tactical victory. It showcased that under President Trump's intensified 2025 domestic security posture, federal agencies were prepared to act with speed and lethality against internal threats, sending a message far beyond the Pacific Northwest. International observers tracking U.S. counter-cartel capability noted the scale-coordinated federal assault synchronized intelligence and a successful high-risk rescue with no hostage casualties. But for Americans watching the story unfold, another question cut more deeply. The violence had not erupted in a distant conflict. It had unfolded inside Washington state, inside a warehouse, run by a cartel that had infiltrated one of Seattle's most trusted institutions. As dawn rose over the debris-strewn Everett waterfront, one question lingered. If a cartel could build a war zone inside an American port city, what does the nation risk if similar networks have already taken root elsewhere, unseen, unchallenged, and waiting? How does a city recover when its institutions, those meant to protect, heal, and regulate, suddenly stand at the center of a criminal storm? In the days after the Everett rescue and Whitlock's arrest, the shock rolling through Seattle felt almost heavier than the raid itself. For many residents, especially older Americans who had spent decades trusting the stability of local government and healthcare systems, the betrayal seemed too vast to comprehend. A respected hospital director had not merely assisted a cartel, he had built part of its infrastructure. And the deeper investigators dug, the clearer it became that he had not done it alone. Inside the FBI evidence facility, analysts laid out dozens of laptops, encrypted phones, patient records, donation ledgers, and financial documents. A pattern emerged. Whitlock had been cultivating a network quiet, carefully layered, and devastatingly effective. 20 public officials across Washington state appeared in his communications. A deputy sheriff receiving recurring payments disguised as security consulting. A city health inspector whose approvals matched cartel shipment arrivals with uncanny precision. A port employee who repeatedly signed off on refrigerated containers without inspection. Even a second surgeon in the region exchanged encrypted messages discussing special transfers and compensation. Each transaction was small enough to look harmless, but over 5 years they totaled $37.9 million, all funneled through Whitlock's charity and medical partnership programs. International reporting from DW Reuters and The Guardian had long warned that corruption spreads most easily where oversight is thin and trust is high. What shocked Seattle was not that cartels sought influence, but that they had succeeded so deeply inside systems people considered untouchable. Across city institutions, panic rose like a tide. Emergency audits swept through hospitals, port authorities, and bureaucratic offices. Contracts were pulled from archives. Donation programs were suspended. Inspectors were questioned about past approvals. It felt as if the city were waking from a long sleep, suddenly realizing a threat had grown in the brightest, most respectable corners of civic life. Older residents, those who had seen Seattle transform across decades, expressed the deepest sense of disillusionment. To them, Whitlock was not just a name. He was a face in community newsletters, a speaker at youth scholarship events, a hospital figure who represented stability and moral authority. Learning he had facilitated narcotic shipments, organ trafficking, and human exploitation felt like discovering a structural crack beneath a family home. For policymakers, the implications grew even larger. Under President Donald Trump's 2025 administration, federal oversight committees demanded answers from Washington state officials. How did a cartel pipeline gain access to medical programs, city permits, and port operations? What gaps in oversight had allowed small irregularities to accumulate into a vast criminal ecosystem? Defense and security analysts noted that this case demonstrated a vulnerability not of enforcement but of trust. Cartels no longer needed to bribe border guards or low-level smugglers. They could enter through respected institutions where questioning motives seemed almost offensive. Politically, the case echoed across the country. Cities from Los Angeles to Chicago quietly reviewed their own medical and civic partnerships. Federal agencies increased scrutiny of donation channels, procurement contracts, and cross-border medical programs, areas long considered too sensitive or too complex for aggressive monitoring. If a respected medical leader could carry out such operations undetected, who else across the country might be abusing similar access? But at the heart of Seattle, the most painful impact was personal. Families who had been treated at Whitlock's hospital wondered whether their records had passed through criminal hands. City workers who trusted colleagues now reconsidered years of overlooked warnings, and communities already strained by the nationwide fentanyl crisis questioned whether this betrayal had contributed to the very drug surges harming their neighborhoods. In community halls, churches, and local meetings, a bitter question surfaced repeatedly: if corruption could hide behind a white coat and a polished resume, how many other institutions might be vulnerable to the same silent decay? And beyond that came an even harder question, one the entire country now had to confront: how does a nation protect its freedom and openness when danger no longer comes from the shadows but from within the institutions built to defend it? What happens to a city and a nation when the final pieces of a criminal network reveal a truth darker than anyone imagined? After the dust settled at the Everett port and Dr. Lawrence Whitlock sat in federal custody, the full magnitude of the case finally came into focus. It was not simply a raid or a rescue or a corruption scandal. It was a moment that forced Seattle and America to confront how deeply a cartel had penetrated institutions believed to be secure. And as prosecutors assembled the last files, the breadth of the criminal empire stunned even seasoned federal officials. 2,500 FBI and ICE agents storm say the final inventory from the Everett operation was staggering: 2.5 tons of narcotics seized, 324 weapons recovered, $52 million in cash, gold certificates, and offshore financial documents intercepted before they could disappear into cartel accounts. Yet the most important number was not measured in drugs or dollars, it was 9. 9 hostages rescued alive, each representing a human life pulled back from a system designed to erase them. Inside federal war rooms, from Tacoma to Washington, D.C., investigators mapped the connections. 31 individuals were indicted: cartel enforcers, transport brokers, corrupt officials, and medical personnel who had knowingly supported Whitlock's shadow network. Every charge was backed by concrete evidence: signatures, transfers, encrypted exchanges, surgical logs that aligned with cartel trafficking schedules down to the hour. There was no ambiguity left, no room for political spin or bureaucratic denial. Seattle had been infiltrated from within. As news spread, the public reaction was immediate and visceral. Crowds gathered outside the courthouse during Whitlock's arraignment, older residents in disbelief, younger ones' angry parents shaken that a man trusted with medical authority had exploited that power to harm vulnerable people. Inside city institutions, the shock spread in waves. Hospital administrators ordered emergency reviews of transplant histories, donor programs, and off-book medical partnerships. Port authorities shut down entire terminals pending inspection. Police departments launched internal investigations into officers named in federal files. Even state lawmakers in Olympia demanded emergency oversight hearings, alarmed that an entire trafficking hub had grown under the guise of community healthcare. Internationally, analysts from DW Reuters, Al Jazeera, and The Guardian noted that the Seattle case represented a turning point. It demonstrated how modern criminal organizations no longer rely solely on brute force. They infiltrate bureaucracies, exploit regulatory blind spots, and disguise operations inside humanitarian systems. For Washington policymakers, especially under President Donald Trump's renewed 2025 focus on law and order governance, the implications were profound. The United States could secure its borders, strengthen federal agencies, and invest in intelligence. But what happens when the threat bypasses all traditional defenses and embeds itself in trusted institutions? The human impact was equally devastating. Families struggled with the knowledge that a man praised for medical leadership had secretly facilitated organ trafficking, drug distribution, and human exploitation. Former patients questioned whether their records, procedures, or donations had unknowingly supported criminal operations. City employees realized that colleagues they had worked alongside for years had quietly helped enable a cartel's rise. And older residents, those who remembered a Seattle defined by civic transparency, felt betrayed by what the case revealed revealed a system that saw danger long after it had taken root. Yet, amid the disillusionment, another realization surfaced: the system had not failed entirely. When evidence finally emerged, federal agents acted. Analysts traced every dollar. Tactical teams risked their lives to rescue strangers they had never met. Prosecutors built cases strong enough to fracture a network that had spent years hiding beneath a facade of professionalism and public virtue. Justice, though shaken, still moved. As Seattle confronts the full scope of Whitlock's betrayal, one truth remains impossible to ignore: danger does not always come from the shadows. Sometimes it stands under bright hospital lights, signs, documents with steady hands, and smiles for the camera at charity events. And that reality forces a final uncomfortable question, one that reaches far beyond this case, far beyond Washington State, and deep into the heart of America's ongoing struggle to balance security with freedom. If criminal networks can infiltrate trusted institutions this deeply, what must the country do politically, socially, and morally to prevent the next threat hiding behind a face that looks safe? The events surrounding the downfall of Dr. Lawrence Whitlock exposed one of the most alarming criminal infiltrations in recent American history. What began as a pre-dawn raid in North Seattle quickly evolved into a sprawling federal investigation, revealing a cartel network hidden inside the civic and medical framework of a major U.S. city. Beneath the polished reputation of a respected hospital director lay offshore shell companies, falsified medical programs, human trafficking routes, and a narcotics pipeline preparing to move more than 2 tons of deadly substances across state lines. The dramatic Everett warehouse assault, marked by fortified defenses, attempted escapes, and the rescue of 9 hostages became a symbol of both the danger facing American communities and the bravery of federal agents operating under intense pressure. As indictments rippled through Washington State, Seattle was forced to confront the uncomfortable truth that corruption had taken root not in dark alleys, but in brightly lit offices, hospitals, and administrative departments. The case revealed vulnerabilities in oversight, trust, and institutional transparency issues now scrutinized on both national and international stages. And as Americans grapple with the implications, one question lingers with growing urgency: how can a nation protect its freedoms when the gravest threats hide behind the very institutions built